Hello, I'm Bill Bullard with R-CALF USA, the voice of the independent cattle producer in the United States of America. Well, since the beginning of 2020, consumers have been persistently buying beef at prices well above what they paid when America's ranchers were receiving $167 a hundredweight for their fat cattle and over $300 a hundredweight for their 550 weight calves. Now, based on national data, those 550 weight calves are bringing about $6 a hundredweight less this year than they brought last year. In fact, the average value of 550 weight calves in 2020 is more than $20 a hundredweight less than their average value for the past 5 years. So the government has offered America's ranchers subsidies in the form of COVID-19 payments. Those subsidies are intended to ease the pain associated with depressed market prices. However, those subsidies have a dark side. And that dark side is that they effectively condition America's ranchers to accept government subsidies in lieu of fighting hard for the meaningful reforms necessary to completely eliminate the need for any government handout. But there's one reason, and one reason only, that those subsidies are needed to make America's ranchers whole, or at least to provide them with some needed financial assistance. And that reason is that the American rancher's domestic and international marketplace is no longer competitive. You see, consumers are demonstrating, and they have persistently demonstrated over the past several years, that they're willing to pay more than enough for beef to support strong cattle prices, from light weight calves to heavy fed cattle. Now, if the marketplace were competitive, then competitive market forces would be allocating to each segment of the multi-segmented beef supply chain their competitive share of the consumer's beef dollar. And with beef prices where they've been for the past 10 months, the market share for ranchers selling 550 weight calves would be about $300 a hundredweight, and for those selling fed cattle, somewhere north of $165 a hundredweight. But the marketplace is so fundamentally broken that downstream participants in the multi-segmented beef supply chain are now able to capture both their share of the consumer beef dollar and the share that should be flowing to every segment of the live cattle supply chain. And we know this is happening because the cattle producer's share of the consumer's beef dollar has fallen to an historic low. In June and July of this year, it was at the lowest level in history, at less than 32%. That means for every dollar a consumer spends on beef, only 32% or 32 cents flowed upstream in the supply chain to be shared among the entire live cattle supply chain, which includes cow-calf producers, backgrounders, stockers, and feeders. Now think about that. In 2014, live cattle supply chain received 55 cents of the consumer's beef dollar, and our entire live cattle supply chain remained whole. But since that time, that share has fallen drastically to below 40%. And remember, that's the share that must keep all the segments of the live cattle supply chain profitable. And this is the direct result of no longer having any meaningful competition in our U.S. cattle market. The easy solution is to simply accept the fact that your market is no longer competitive and to allow those who have been capturing your competitive share to keep it, and to then ask the government for a handout. Now, this is what Congress is most comfortable in doing, but that's not the right way to solve this, and it certainly isn't the way of the American rancher. The only right way to solve this is to spur Congress into restoring marketplace competition so the entire live cattle supply chain can begin receiving their rightful competitive share of every consumer beef dollar, the share that only a competitive marketplace can properly allocate. So keep your 2020 government handout, but pick up your phone and call your senators to tell them you don't want any more. Tell them that you expect them to stand up to the multinational meat packers, to stand up to the meat packers' allied farm groups, and to stand up to all their economists to do two things that will restore our lost competition. First, they must support Senate Bill 3693, the bipartisan Grassley Tester bill that forces the packers to compete in the marketplace by purchasing at least 50% of their cattle from that competitive marketplace. And second, require all beef sold in America to be labeled as to its country of origin, so the American rancher can begin competing in the largest beef consuming market in the world. And that's the market right at our feet. That's the U.S. beef market. So folks, this is serious, and I hope you will help. And as a word of caution, beware of all the watered down bills being filed that do not require the packers to participate in the cash market at levels that will truly restore competition. These watered-down versions are designed to maintain the status quo, which is absolutely contrary to the interests of independent cattle producers. So to learn more of what we do to support America's farmers and ranchers and all of rural America, please visit us at www.r-cafusa.com and join our efforts to restore independence and profitability to the United States cattle producer. With that, thank you and goodbye.